So in my last highlights video, I said this. If you want to figure out how to choose the Necron blade for you, I should really make a video on that, shouldn't I? Do you guys reckon I should make a video that goes into detail as to which blade to pick depending on how you want to play the game? Because I swear I've done that already. And just judging by all the replies I got, you guys definitely wanted it. And as per all of your guys' requests, today's video is going to be your one-stop shop to everything you need to know about Necron blades inside of Hypixel Skyblock, and hopefully by the end of this video I have answered any of the questions that you might have had, and it should help you decide on which Necron blade you should buy, whether you're going to be buying one tomorrow, or if you're going to buy one later down the line. But if you do have any further questions regarding this video, whether I left out some information or you're just unsure about something that I have said, feel free to ask about it over on my Twitch streams. The links are down in the description below. And with the introduction out of the way, let's get straight into the video. Alrighty, so as you can see, today's video is going to be your one-stop shop to everything you need to know about the Wither blades in Hypixel Skyblock, and hopefully by the end of this video you should be able to decide which Wither blade you are going to go for, whether you're going to buy one tomorrow or whether you're going to buy one later down the line. So to kick things off right at the start here, I'm going to pull up the stats of all four of the Wither blades, talk about their base stats, and give you guys the rundown as to what all the stats means, and hopefully you should be able to pick the Wither blade that suits you the best. So to start things off right at the beginning here, I'm going to go with the Hyperion stats because the Hyperion is the Wither blade that everybody knows and loves, and by far has to be one of the most popular variants that everybody chooses. So if we have a look at the base stats alone, we get 260 damage and 150 strength, and that's paired with 350 base intelligence with 30 base ferocity. Now overall those stats are really powerful. If you compare that to any other lower tier weapon in the game, it is definitely stronger in most aspects. Although when we compare it to the other variants that do exist, you'll see how it differs across the board. Now the set bonus of the Hyperion does give you +1 damage and +2 intelligence per Catacombs level, and this is really important because this weapon, as you can see, is very focused on intelligence, and it does boost your mana significantly as you do level up your Catacombs skill. Now for the next Wither blade that I'll be comparing here, we're going to be talking about the Valkyrie, and as you can see, the Valkyrie does have 270 damage and 145 strength. Now just looking at the base stats of the Valkyrie alone, the Hyperion actually has 5 extra strength than the Valkyrie does, although it does lack 10 extra damage. And if you look at the Valkyrie here as well, it doubles the ferocity of the Hyperion, but it has nowhere near as much intelligence. Now looking at the item bonus of the Valkyrie as well, we get +1 damage and +1 strength per Catacombs level. So as you can see, this weapon is a lot more strength oriented, but if we look at the ferocity again, it kind of implies that this weapon is going to be a lot more focused on ferocity, and in return, I guess, DPS. Now for the third of the Necron blades that I'll be covering in today's video, we have the Scylla. Now the Scylla has 270 damage, 150 strength, 12% crit chance, 35% crit damage, 50 intelligence, and 30 ferocity. Now right off the bat, if we compare that to both the Hyperion and the Valkyrie, it has the same damage as the Valkyrie and 10 more damage than the Hyperion, but it also has 5 bonus strength in comparison to the Valkyrie and the same amount of strength as the Hyperion. However, what these other two Necron blades do lack is the crit chance and crit damage. The Scylla does give you an extra bit of crit damage and crit chance, and if we look at the item bonus as well, we get +1 damage and +1 crit damage per Catacombs level. Now the intelligence and the ferocity here are just sort of there because they kind of have to be. The intelligence is the same as the Valkyrie, and the ferocity is the same as that of the Hyperion. And just looking at the base stats alone here, this sword seems to be a lot more focused on crit damage, and if it's got more crit damage than the Valkyrie, it'll probably deal more damage as well. But all in all, the Scylla is definitely the most complex of the Wither blades, as it has more stats to look at in general. But now for the fourth and final Necron blade of today's video, we have the Estrella. Now the Estrella actually has the same damage and strength as the Scylla, which means it has 5 more strength than the Valkyrie and also 10 more damage than the Hyperion. But for the Estrella, what makes it special here is the 250 defense and 20 true defense, and then looking at the item bonus, we get +1 damage and +2 defense per Catacombs level. Now just like the other Necron blades, it does have the 50 intelligence and the 30 ferocity because all the Necron blades have some kind of intel and ferocity element to them. But this weapon here is definitely a lot more focused on defense and tanking because as you can see, it's got more defense and true defense, which is amplified by your Catacombs level. And now for the last thing that I want to talk about for the base stats of all these weapons is that they all are eligible for having the Wither Impact right click ability. Now Wither Impact is really what makes these weapons super powerful inside of dungeons. You teleport 10 blocks in front of you, you implode dealing a lot of damage in a nearby radius, and you also also get a bunch of absorption hearts, which do apply to your health bar, and they actually get absorbed as health if you do keep the absorption hearts for more than 5 seconds. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because if we have Wither Impact on all 4 of the Necron Blades, that means that no matter which Necron Blade you pick, you will always have the scrolled ability, which means that realistically you want to look at all the other base stats and what each weapon is good for when you do decide which one you want to play inside of dungeons. But I'll get to all that information later on into the video. Next up here, we're going to jump into some damage tests just to give you guys a side-by-side comparison as to how all of the damage fares in this video. And then once we've got all of the damage numbers, I'll talk about what each weapon is good for, how it applies to the class you want to play, and also at what stage of the game you should be using them depending on what your stats look like. But before I do hop into the damage test here, it's always important that I cover what my stats look like at the beginning of the damage testing, because of course your stats will differ to mine, and the reason that my damage numbers do appear is all judging based off of my stats. So to get things started here, I'll just cover the Necron Blade that I'll be using in today's video. It does have Fuming Hot Potato books, it is recombobulated, it has the Art of War, and I also put 2 Jade gemstones, or the ones that give you strength. And the gemstones that I put on this one, I believe are the fine ones because they're not too expensive, but they're also not the cheapest option. As for the enchants, I do have Sharpness 7, Giant Killer 7, and Vicious 5, being some pretty expensive enchants that not everybody uses. And then I just have everything else at tier 6, Dragon Hunter 5 as well, and then Ultimate Wise as the ultimate enchant of my choice. The Reforge bonus is the Suspicious bonus because I did put the Suspicious Reforge on my Scylla, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video as to why that is important. As for the armor I'll be using, these are the stats of the armor pieces I have here. Fully maxed out Necron armor with a Warden's helmet, Growth 6, Prot 6, Legion 5, all that good stuff. And as for the talismans I've got, I have 15 mythic, 10 legendary, 5 rare, 12 uncommon, 14 common, and I've optimized these for attack speed, so a lot of these are going to be on bloody, shaded, strong, and a bunch of other random combinations. As for my skills, I am combat level 55, foraging level 32, and I'm also catacombs level 35. And just like I always say, I will not be using any pets in today's video so that the pet items and the abilities of the pets don't affect the damage, so that way you have raw damage numbers of what these Necron Blades look like, and it makes it a more fair comparison. So to get things started here, I will be using my Scylla first up, because of course I already had it crafted into a Scylla, and then as we progress into the video, I'll craft it into a Valkyrie, into an Estrella, and then into a Hyperion. But to get some brief damage numbers on these criticals right here, getting a hit off, we did 341,000 damage right there, followed up by another 342,000 damage, and then for the third and the fourth hit, another 342 and then 354,000, but that was because I believe the Execute enchant kicked in, and then we did another 350-ish thousand damage, so overall some pretty substantial damage numbers. And now that we have finished up with all of these Scylla damage tests, I'm going to go ahead and craft this thing into a Valkyrie to do all of the Valkyrie damage tests now. And as you can see, the swap over from the Scylla over to the Valkyrie, 335 damage, 195 strength, and it turns into 335 damage and 220 strength. Now, if you do recall from earlier, the base stats of the Valkyrie actually give you less ferocity than that of the Scylla, but because I am Catacombs 35, I actually get an extra 5 strength using the Valkyrie over the Scylla, and that is when it's fully enchanted and maxed out the way that you see it right here. Now that we have the Valkyrie all crafted up and ready to go, I'm going to go do the exact same thing that I did with the Scylla and just get some damage on these criticals. So first hit here, we did about 326,000 damage, followed by 328,000, 327,000, another 328,000, and then for the final hit, we do about 327,000 damage with the Valkyrie. And now that we have finished up with the Valkyrie damage tests right here, I'm going to go ahead and now convert this thing into a Hyperion, because of course the next damage test that I'll be doing is going to be with the Hyperion. And just to give you guys a brief stat overview, we get 325 damage and 190 strength, as opposed to the 335 damage and 220 strength using the Valkyrie with all of the enchants. And now that we have converted the Valkyrie into a Hyperion here, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same damage tests from before. We did about 309,000 damage in that hit there, followed up by another 309,000, 310,000, 310,000 again, and another 310,000 damage. And now that we have the Hyperion damage test out of the way, the last Necron Blade that we do have to test here is going to be the Astria. So as you do, we're just going to surround that with the Jolly Pink Rocks and give you guys a base stat comparison again but with all of the enchants. And as you can see, we get 335 damage, 190 strength with all of my enchants and reforges and stuff, while the Hyperion has 325 damage and 190 strength, so it is an increase of about 10 damage. And now that we have the Astria crafted here, I'm going to go ahead and get a hit on the Cryptical, dealing about 319,000 damage, followed by 320,000 and 320,000 again. We did about 321,000 on the 4th hit and 321,000 on the 5th hit, so that is all the damage stats for the Astria outside of dungeons. So now that we have all the outside dungeons damage tests complete, and I also went ahead and did all of the inside dungeon damage tests off camera, as it would have made the video way too long. So right off the bat, the highest damage dealing weapon that we do have out of all 4 Necron Blades has to be the Scylla. The Scylla did around 340,000 damage outside of dungeons, and inside of dungeons with the left click, the highest damage it did deal was about 2.6 million. Now the closest competitor to this was of course the Valkyrie, which did around 20,000 damage less outside of dungeons in comparison to the Scylla, and when it came to inside dungeons, it did around 2.4 million-ish damage, which I believe was the highest damage it did hit inside dungeons. And then the Hyperion and the Astria were pretty head-to-head inside of dungeons, dealing around 2.2 million, both of them for the left-click damage, while outside of dungeons, the Hyperion was about 10,000 damage worse than the Astria, crowning it as the worst weapon of the bunch for left-click damage. However, on the contrary, the Hyperion outperformed all 3 of the other Necron Blades in the right-click damage tests, as it did around 500,000 damage more than the other 3 that we did test in the video, while the other 3 being the Valkyrie, the Scylla, and the Astria actually had the exact same damage all across the board when it came to right-click damage. However, the difference in damage here is not really the main focus of today's video. What really matters here is going to be the actual item bonus that each blade gives you, because the damage that you do deal left click is already so comparable to one another, it isn't much of a difference either inside or outside of dungeons. And now comes the part of the video that you've all been waiting for. Which Necron blade should you buy, which one should you go for, and which one will suit your playstyle the best out of the 4 that we tested in today's video? Well, to get the easiest one out of the way here, the Hyperion suits the player who is either just starting floor 7 and your Catacombs skill is pretty low down as you haven't really gotten many runs in just yet, or on the contrary, if you are a more high level player, you want to get into Master Mode and for some reason you're using right click mage inside of Master Mode, then the Hyperion is going to benefit you as well. The Hyperion had the lowest left-click damage out of the bunch, but the right-click damage that it did display was significantly higher than all the other Necron Blades, and with Blessing Scaling and other perks, it is going to outperform them all in that regard. This makes the Hyperion a perfect option for the beginner who's just started floor 7, because more often than not, the people who just start floor 7 are going to be around Catacombs 27 to maybe Catacombs 30, and if that's the case, your damage is going to be a lot weaker in comparison to most of your teammates, and having that extra mana that you do get from the Hyperion's bonus is going to make a huge difference when you are using right-click mage. However, if you are a player who's been playing dungeons for quite some time now, maybe you're about Catacombs 33-ish or onwards, and you want to have a Necron's Blade which is both good inside and outside of dungeons, then the Scylla is definitely the one for you. The Scylla displayed the highest amount of left-click damage that we did see out of all the other Necron Blades, and this is just using any standard build that you will be using. And when it comes to higher level gameplay outside dungeons, Enderman Slayer is a pretty good example of that. Another bonus thing about the Scylla as well is that because it has the highest crit damage in the game, and as you can see with my Scylla, I get about 240% in comparison to the other Necron Blades. This makes the Wither Impact ability, or more specifically, the Wither Shield ability from Wither Impact, much stronger because the regen and the health that you do get from it is amplified due to the higher crit damage. And just to read out what the stats of the Wither Shield scroll actually says, it tells you that it reduces the damage taken by 10% for 5 seconds, and it also grants an absorption shield that gives you 150% of your crit damage as hell. So because the Scylla actually has the highest crit damage in the game, this makes it a really good healing weapon if you do want to have that just for the extra Wither Impact ability. And it also has the highest single target damage in the entire game, and overall it's just relatively versatile. With that being said here, the next blade that I want to talk about is going to be the Valkyrie, and this weapon is a lot more suited to more specific playstyles, and more specifically the more ferocity oriented builds. Now the Valkyrie, as you saw in the damage test, didn't really do as much damage as the Scylla, but it definitely did more damage than both the Hyperion and the Astria. Now because of this, it is definitely a left click weapon and it flourishes more in the left click scene. But because if you look at the base stats, we get plus 60 ferocity, and inside of dungeons I was getting around 110 ferocity without a ferocity build. And this means that you're going to be at a minimum double swiping every single hit that you you get. And if you choose to amplify the ferocity higher with something like a tiger pet, or maybe use some slightly different enchants and enrichment setups or things like that, then you're going to be doing a lot more than just double swiping on every hit, and upwards of triple and quadruple swiping, which does increase your DPS dramatically. This caters more towards the Axe of the Shredded Berserker builds that people do like to play, because the Axe of the Shredded is a very popular dungeon weapon for the Berserker class, which allows you to just throw out a billion axes all at once, and if you swap to a Valkyrie, you actually get all the ferocity stacked onto this weapon, and it does massive damage on bosses and also other mobs that you do fight. So the potential of the Valkyrie is really high, and it definitely does outperform every other Necron Blade that we have covered if you do decide to use it with an optimal build. But if you like to keep things simple, or you don't see yourself really going that sweaty and really optimizing a build to have the highest DPS possible, then the Scylla or the Hyperion might be a better option for you, as the Valkyrie, like I said, is a lot more specific. And now last but not least, here we have the Astria. Now the Astria, as you saw before, doesn't really have insane damage, nor does it have really good right-click capability. It is slightly better than the Hyperion though, and it is weaker than both the Valkyrie and the Scylla, but what really makes this one powerful is the defense and the true defense granted by these base stats. Now, when it comes to the players that should be using the Astria over the other Necron Blades, this is actually going to be very similar to that of the Hyperion. Now, if you're a player who's just got into floor 7, like I said with the Hyperion, maybe in between Catacombs 27 to 30, and you aren't super powerful yet, the Astria might be a really good option for you, because if you lack survivability and you lack EHP, or you find yourself dying frequently, then having the extra defense and true defense is going to be very useful, because when you are holding your main weapon of choice, you're going to be a lot tankier and a lot stronger than if you used any of the other Necron Blades. I did actually take a quick screenshot of the difference between using the defense of any other weapon and then compared it to an Astria, and the Astria gives you around 1,000 more defense inside of dungeons than all the other Necron Blades, and that is not an amount that you should be shying away from. However, this weapon is also useful for any of the high level tanks that want to be just having the most EHP possible in this game, and if you're a high level tank player, maybe you do Master Mode and you want to be able to soak up as much damage as possible and be the strongest player on your team, the Astria is going to do a very good job of that, because of course it provides the highest defense and highest true defense. So all in all, to give you guys a very short and condensed version of what I just said, Hyperion if you need the extra right click damage and the intelligence buff, whether you're a low level player or a really high end player. The Scylla is the all round weapon, you can use it inside of dungeons or outside of dungeons, no specific build required, and it has some really good healing. The Valkyrie is very powerful for ferocity oriented builds, it has the highest capabilities and the highest DPS in the entire game, but it is a lot more specific and harder to actually work with. And then the Astria is for both the lower level or the higher level player, and it depends on whether you need the survivability because you like actually surviving in dungeons, or because you want to be the tankiest tank in the entire game possible, and that way you could soak up as much damage as possible for your teammates. And with all that being said, that is going to wrap up everything that I did have for today's video. If you did make it this far and you watched it all the way through, I thank you for that, because it was quite a lengthy one, and all these damage tests took me a long time to actually record. And if you did find it useful or informative, or it helped you out in deciding the Necron Blade of your choice, then please do consider subscribing to the channel, as I upload these Hypixel Skyblock videos every Wednesdays and Fridays. And if you also have any further questions about this video, or you would like to talk to me and discuss these things in a separate environment, I do stream live over on Twitch every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The links are down in the description below. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video. And as always, take care and peace. Although one thing that I do know is if you're a foreigner in Indonesia, it'll be what do you mean? What do you mean? Bro, Archer double shot throwing. Archer double shot. That was not me. That was not me. I aimed at the right one, and then it shot a second one. Shut up.